Right, I want us to have a discussion of these other set of practice questions or this problem set that I uploaded, which requires you to understand the interaction of exchange rates and external trade indicators like your current account balance. Much of what I have here, especially in terms of real effective exchange rate, nominal exchange rates, you did all this stuff with Prof. Keaton. I vividly remember his presentation in 202 where you will be showing that this thing is more expensive here than in the US or whatever, or more expensive in the US than here, using real effective exchange rates. So I will not spend much time here. I expect that you are able to define this, and in any case, if you can't, you have to read your 202 textbook to understand those concepts, right? But what I want to focus on is what is written in bold there in question 3, because that is by and large what people struggle with, to understand if they are given data and no one has told them which one is a dependent variable and which one is an explanatory variable. They get stuck. They don't know which one should be the explanatory variable and which one should be a dependent variable. And that is what I want to nail down. Now, if you were to carry out a regression between current account balance and exchange rate, which means it could be real effective exchange rate or nominal exchange rate, which variable would be the dependent variable? Explain. What theory informs your reasoning? Now, I like these sorts of questions because questions like these sort of force you to reflect on economic theory, which is the very theory you are trying to test. Do you see what I mean? Right, so here we have to think in terms of what you were taught by Prof. Keaton and also Prof. Snowball. You will remember that your current account balance, which is really the difference between the sum of exports of goods and services less your imports of goods and services, bilateral transfers and so forth, remittances and other things might be included in there. Now, the difference between those gives us our current account balance. Now, what you are saying is, what we know is that our current account balance is the difference between exports and imports. But what determines the performance of exports? It is the exchange rate, which I shall call E, right? And what determines the behavior of imports? It's both the exchange rate and the levels of real income. Remember, you have the marginal propensity to consume. Do you remember that? So what you see from this relationship is that our current account balance, the evolution of that, is governed by the evolution of the exchange rate as well as the evolution of affluence in society measured by the behavior of real GDP. So in this case, it is clear to me that the current account balance depends on the behavior of the exchange rate. Hence, in many countries where they use fixed exchange rates, you will find a lot of battles between the Minister of Finance or the Reserve Bank and exporters of goods, mining companies, growers of cash crops and so forth. They always want the currency to be weaker because that makes their exports perform a lot better. And when the exports have performed a lot better, that also has an effect on the behavior of the current account. So it is clear that the exchange rate explains the behavior of the current account. But you also have another theory called the J-curve, which you might have looked at. Now, the J-curve, while here we will not be able to illustrate it because we are doing bivariate regression analysis, but what it is all about, it's something like this. If you consider a country that is running a fixed exchange rate or even a managed exchange rate, now there comes a time when the currency is overvalued, which means it is implicitly taxing our exports. Okay, an overvalued exchange rate is like a boon to importers, but it is an implied or an implicit tax on exporters. So then government decides, oh well, let us devalue this exchange rate. Let us devalue the currency to cushion our exporters, the lifeline of the nation. Once you do that, the J-curve says the initial response of the current account to this devaluation of the exchange rate. Do you hear what I'm saying? What is responding is the current account it is responding to the devaluation of the exchange rate, which means the exchange rate influences the behavior of the current account. Do you see what I'm saying? So then it says the initial response is a deterioration in the current account, then subsequent recovery as exports begin to respond, because there is always a lag between the time the exchange rate is devalued and the supply response from the export side, although imports may immediately react. Do you see that? So I'm using theoretical concepts in economics to be able to understand which variable has to be the dependent variable. That's what you should learn to do. Here it's the idea of just stating the equation. So our current account is equal to B0 plus B1. I'll just say E exchange, okay, exchange rate plus your error term, where here exchange rate can be nominal exchange rate or the real effective exchange rate, which means there are two equations that can be estimated here. Okay, then you have to estimate the regression and interpret the slope coefficients, which I think you are familiar with. I've estimated them before. I think all of them were insignificant, but the one I want to focus on is the last one, because it requires you to apply some theory. Then maybe we can use that very last one also to talk about these other two hypothesis testing procedures, or I can talk about them in another video. Then here what you are required to do is to transform your exports into a logged variable. Okay, so now this is log exports. Okay, we can just say log x. We know that exports are usually represented by x, and we can also have log imports, and then let's have log nominal exchange rate. I shall call it NE. So what I want there is, okay, let me interchange these. I want to use a shortcut here. Okay, so I have nominal exchange rate, exports, imports. Yeah, so I'll come here, log, I pick that, the nominal exchange rate is here, I close that. I can drag this across. What you see is that it has picked X there, it has picked M there. So I've logged these, then I can highlight them together. I just double click, it generates everything for me. I don't have to check the accuracy. I know that it has done it exactly the way it should. Now the question wants you to estimate the exports nominal exchange rate relationship, imports nominal exchange rate relationship. So now let's come to data, regression. Our dependent variable in the first instance is the logarithm of exports, and our explanatory variable is the nominal log of the nominal exchange rate. Right, so let's run our regression. Here's the regression. Let me just put these numbers into a format you can understand. These numbers are so small, the p-values, they are 0.000. It means these are very, very, very significant effects of the exchange rate. So this is the number we want there. And the dependent here is log x. Okay, log exports. Now let's come back and do the same for the other one, which is our explanatory variable remains nominal exchange rate, but we want to change the dependent, which should now be log m. So we pick log m. The explanatory remains the same, so we are not going to change it. Then we say OK. This also is very, 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 very significant. Very, very significant. Okay, which is also this much, and it's also that much. Wow, that's interesting. Isn't it the same size of the coefficient? They are different. Now, although the results here might be misleading because this is a very, very long time series, and the possibility that the variables are not returning to their average level over time, that is, they keep changing. The data generating process we were discussing the other day might have shifted, especially with the transition from the apartheid to democracy. We have ignored that for now because it's none of our concern. Now, so we have estimated if both the explanatory variable and the dependent variable are in logs, okay, are in logs, this is in logs, this is in logs, this coefficient here is interpreted as an elasticity, which means, for example, here we are saying a 1% depreciation in the nominal exchange rate leads to a 0.93% increase in exports. So our exports are responsive. They are not very responsive. They are relatively inelastic. If you still remember your microeconomic theory, if you have elasticity between these ranges, or if you have your elasticity being equal to 1, or if you have a elasticity greater than 1, if you have your elasticity equal to 0. So the first one there is perfectly inelastic relationship. Here it's relatively inelastic. This is unit elasticity. This is a relatively elastic. So you see this coefficient here lies between 0 and 1. This elasticity coefficient, which means our exports are relatively inelastic to the behavior of the exchange rate, so also are our imports. So now the question you have then says, for a moment, now let's ignore that the exchange rate is actually floating. For a moment, let's assume that South Africa is actually operating under a fixed exchange rate system. Now, using your findings in this question, explain whether devaluation of the rand would benefit South Africa. Now, here I want to see if you understand what economic theory says. Okay? You would have been taught about what is called the Marshall-Lerner condition, probably in 202, although we ourselves, when we were first years, we did this in 102 in first years. Not, I wasn't at Rhodes, I was somewhere, but I mean I did that in first year. Right, so the Marshall-Lerner condition says devaluation can only be helpful to an economy if the sum, that is, let me use shorthand, if the elasticity of exports plus the elasticity of imports to changes in the exchange rate is greater than 1. That is, you must now add the two elasticities. In this case, let us add those elasticities. This is the elasticity of imports to changes in the nominal exchange rate plus the elasticity of exports to changes in the nominal exchange rate. Then we say, okay, now we get a number which is somewhere above, let me copy this and paste it as values. Okay, that's our answer. I want to take this to the other sheet I was working on. Where is that sheet where I was writing all those things? Was it the first one? Okay, here. Right, let's paste that here. So now what you see is that the sum of the elasticity of exports and imports exceed 1. We are in this range, which means that in this case a devaluation would be beneficial to South Africa. It will result in the improvement. Our exports and our imports respond, okay? And here they roughly respond by about the same magnitude to a 1% devaluation of the exchange rate. So the fact that there are some here is responsive. It means that once we devalue that, we expect our exports to go up. Then we can try to implement other policies that curtail imports. And as that process continues, then your current account balance improves. You see what I mean? So you are doing economic reasoning using the results you have, drawing from the concepts and the theories that you have done. That is what econometrics is about, understanding your theory. So understanding your theory is the bedrock, because for you to be able to know what to test, you should have understood your theory first. Then you are saying, oh, they keep saying this, let me try to test this and see if it works. What do I need? I need to specify my model this way. I need these kinds of data. Or if the variables of interest are not available, I need to find some variables that might proxy them, that might represent them, that I might use in their place in the relationship for me to be able to say something about the relationship. So I will stop here and hope that you will be able to get out these things to reason with your theory. If you memorized your theory to pass in first year and second year, now it's time to know it. Because there is no way I will tell you the theory, because I'm actually trying to find out if you know your theory, then I can see that you think econometrically with your theory. Do you see what I mean? I can't spoon feed you on these things.